So last week we discussed the design of the First Order's Resurgent-Class Battlecruisers, and today we're going to take a look more at the history of that class of vessel, and some of the more specific roles it played within the First Order's Navy. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So, as we discussed last week, the Resurgent-Class Battlecruiser is the pinnacle of Star Destroyer design. It takes the advantages from the Venator and the ISD and combines them together while eliminating the flaws of both of those vessels. But it played some very interesting roles in the history of the galaxy, specifically in the formation of the First Order, and I figured, like today, we could take a closer look at exactly how this Star Destroyer came into being and the history it has as a class. So let's start with its design and construction, and that story starts with Kuat and Tralla. Following the collapse of the Galactic Empire and the fall of Kuat during the Battle of Kuat, Kuat Drive Yards, the company responsible for building the Venator and the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, had to restructure themselves, forming a new company, Kuat and Tralla Heavy Engineering. Now, we don't know for sure whether Kuat and Tralla had any major contracts during the first few years of its existence following the collapse of the Empire. But we do know that as the First Order rose to power within the unknown regions, they started to quietly contract Kuat and Tralla to make them vessels, and Kuat and Tralla, having once again lost most of their contracts with the collapse of the Galactic Empire, were more than happy to sort of jump in and take this role. It's not known exactly how many Resurgent-class battlecruisers were built originally, but it's likely that there were quite a few, and it's likely they were built in relative secrecy. If Kuat still operated the Kuat Drive Yards over Kuat, it's likely they weren't built there. Instead, they were likely built somewhere more secretive where the eyes of the New Republic weren't quite as likely to gaze. And once they were completed, they were very quietly shipped off into the unknown regions, perhaps as trade vessels that were lost to piracy or something out there, but ultimately ended up being handed over to the First Order. By the time of the events of The Force Awakens and the First Order's war with the New Republic, there was likely quite a few Resurgent-class battlecruisers working within the First Order's Navy. They seemed to operate as command vessels for most fleets, but on occasions they would operate as the sole vessel of a fleet. We know, for example, during the Battle of Dakar that 2 to 3 Resurgent-class battlecruisers were present along with a Mandator 4-class dreadnought. And we know that during most of the events of The Force Awakens, the Resurgent-class battlecruisers seem to operate as independent units, not having much along the way of escorts, which actually kind of makes sense. A lot of the flaws of the Imperial-class Star Destroyer that could have been solved by giving them a light escort to, for example, handle fighters, weren't quite as present in the Resurgent class with their robust point defense networks designed specifically to shoot down fighters that the Imperial-class Star Destroyers simply couldn't. And we see, for example, that during the events of The Last Jedi, when Snoke's Mega-class Star Destroyer, the Supremacy, is pursuing the Resistance fleet, that it is supported by a small flotilla of what appears to be 10 to 20 Resurgent-class battlecruisers. However, it's noteworthy that during this time, the Resistance represented the biggest threat to the First Order's ascendance into power. So the idea that they would focus large, very uniquely constructed fleets against the Resistance makes quite a bit of sense, honestly. My guess is elsewhere in the galaxy, where the First Order was fighting local defense forces and the remnants of the New Republic, they were likely using a more varied fleet, like what I described in my last video, where they could be, for example, a Resurgent-class battlecruiser leading a fleet of older Imperial 1 and 2 class Star Destroyers, as well as some other smaller cruisers and destroyers built specifically for the First Order or commandeered from other factions throughout history. And honestly, that's a great role for the Resurgent-class battlecruiser. It fits very nicely into the position of a command vessel. It's designed from the ground up to be robust and be able to survive direct attacks, something that Imperial command vessels, like the Executor-class dreadnoughts, seem basically incapable of doing. On top of that, it carries a very large fighter wing and has a robust system of defenses designed to protect the vessel against incoming attacks and carry out offensive strikes, making it a very capable warship and the perfect spot for, say, an admiral leading a fleet to choose as his flagship. And that doesn't even take into account the vessel's significant size compared to other vessels that would have been in service with the First Order. We know that the Resurgent-Class Battlecruisers were present at battles across the galaxy during this period of time, but that a lot of them were ultimately destroyed as the events of the Rise of Skywalker unfolded, and the First Order started to fall back from their positions across the galaxy. With the fall of the First Order, these vessels would have been the primary targets for any small civilian resistance factions going after what was left of the struggling faction. All in all, the First Order's Resurgent-Class Battlecruiser represents the faction as a whole very nicely. Its name alone says resurgence, these Imperial ideas returning to the galaxy, which is exactly what the First Order was trying to do. These ships were likely built in secret and shipped into the unknown regions, just like the First Order, and when they scattered across the galaxy and became a present force, they would have been just as iconic of an image for the First Order as the Imperial-class Star Destroyer was for the Galactic Empire. Still, though, the Resurgent-Class Star Destroyer is a very impressive vessel on its own, regardless of its history, and if you'd like to learn more about the sort of statistics and capability of the Resurgent-Class Battlecruiser, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments what you think about the role the Resurgent-Class Battlecruiser played in the events of the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Do you think that the Resurgent-Class Star Destroyer was built in huge numbers to support a galactic invasion, or do you see them more as a more specialized vessel that we just saw a lot because we were watching the First Order's main conflict against the Resistance? Basically, do you think they were built in numbers comparable to the Imperial-class Star Destroyer in any way, shape, or form? Or do you think we're looking at a majority of the maybe 100 or so that were built being on screen during the sequel trilogy? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, leave it down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.